Beneath the world's oldest ice lies a secret so unsettling, scientists risked everything to uncover it. What if the frozen depths aren't just history preserved, but a warning left behind by something ancient, something that was never meant to wake up? From mysterious life forms to eerie signals no one can explain, this is the story of what humanity unleashed when we dared to drill where no one had gone before. What they found in the ancient ice will change how you see our planet forever. There is a certain silence that dwells over the world's coldest places, a hush so deep that it seems even the wind has forgotten how to speak. In these places, the horizon vanishes in a white infinity, and the air itself is so clear and sharp that each breath feels like inhaling the essence of time itself. People say that nothing changes here, that the ice is eternal. But beneath the stillness, secrets are always shifting. For centuries, explorers, dreamers, and scientists have gazed across the frozen wastelands, their imaginations haunted by what might sleep beneath those endless layers of blue and white. These icy realms are more than mere landscapes. They are the last great vaults of our planet's forgotten history. Legends have always swirled around ancient ice. Arctic travelers whispered of voices that seemed to echo from beneath their feet, of ghostly lights flickering inside crevasses at night, of strange silhouettes seen just at the edge of a storm. Local tales told of spirits entombed beneath the ice, waiting for a time when the world would be unprepared for their awakening. Some stories warned that the land itself was cursed, guarded by a chill so deep it could seep into your bones and twist your dreams. For those who dared to listen, the frozen wastelands sang songs of longing, of loss, and of warnings left unread. It was not only folklore that gave the ancient ice its mystique. As scientific curiosity began to peel back the layers of myth, the idea that these places were unchanging slowly fell away. Researchers found that the ice sheets, far from being lifeless, were dynamic archives, a living memory of millions of years, storing not only snow and air, but also secrets from eras when creatures unlike anything alive today ruled the earth. Each layer, pressed tight over the centuries, was a letter in a message sent from the past. And the further down you drilled, the stranger the message became. What truly lay hidden in the heart of the ice? Was it only frozen water and trapped air, or something far more uncanny? The very first scientific expeditions to these polar regions were marked not just by the thrill of discovery, but by an undercurrent of unease. The vast sheets that cloaked Antarctica and Greenland weren't just remnants of ancient snow. They were the product of relentless cycles, accumulating, compressing, and preserving everything that fell to their surface. And as the climate warmed, what once had been lost to time was starting to wake up. There was an almost magnetic pull for those who dedicated their lives to unlocking these mysteries. The deeper the ice, the older the secrets. Every new core sample became a key to a door that no one had ever opened. Researchers would gather in dimly lit labs, hunched over glass vials filled with tiny bubbles trapped thousands of years ago, searching for whispers of ancient atmospheres, extinct bacteria, perhaps even diseases no one had ever encountered. And with every breakthrough, a ripple of excitement and anxiety would race through the scientific community. They knew that they were on the threshold of revelations that could redraw the boundaries of what humanity understood about life, extinction, and the planet itself. Sometimes after long nights spent in isolated research stations, even the most rational minds would feel the pressure of the unknown. Alone with the howl of the wind, they'd wonder about the warnings embedded in old legends. What if the ice was not just a vault, but a lock? And if so, what price would the world pay for opening it? The thought was usually chased away by the comfort of data and reason, but it never disappeared entirely. It lingered at the edges of dreams, persistent as frost. In recent years, as technology has allowed humans to probe deeper and more precisely than ever before, the sense of anticipation has only grown. The world is beginning to understand that what we find beneath the ancient ice is not simply a matter for academic curiosity. It is a direct confrontation with the unknown. Every drill bit that carves into the depths, every core sample brought to the surface is a gamble, a step into a darkness where the only light comes from the fragile beam of discovery. Perhaps that is why when the first signs of something truly inexplicable began to surface, strange life forms, preserved far beyond what seemed possible, bizarre chemical signatures, even unexplainable physical phenomena, the reaction was not just one of excitement, but a deep, primal chill. The old stories, it turned out, may have contained more truth than anyone wanted to admit. Standing on the edge of an ice shelf at dawn, with the cold biting at every patch of exposed skin and the vast emptiness stretching out in every direction, it is easy to feel both insignificant and awestruck. There is a feeling that the world is holding its breath, that beneath your feet the oldest secrets on Earth are stirring. Something in the frozen depths calls out, not in words, but in the quiet certainty that the story is far from over. This is just the beginning. Beneath the endless expanse of white lies an archive more vast and intricate than any library humanity has built. The ice is not merely frozen water, but a living chronicle, an unbroken record carved layer upon layer, silently gathering the stories of the planet long before the first civilizations kindled their fires. Each winter, snow falls and settles, a soft shroud that slowly compresses under the weight of the years, capturing within it the invisible breath of vanished eras. Locked away in the quiet dark, these layers become time capsules, preserving traces of lost worlds in crystalline clarity. For those who have dared to study them, the polar ice caps and permafrost are not just geological features. They are guardians of memory. In their depths, trapped air bubbles preserve the compositions of ancient atmospheres, offering glimpses into what the world was like during the reign of mammoths, or when strange ferns towered over swamps where no human ever walked. Dust and pollen, caught in the slow drift of centuries, reveal the rise and fall of forests, the silent passage of extinctions, and the first faint traces of humanity's presence on the planet. Even the most delicate signals, the faintest shifts in chemistry, are meticulously archived, awaiting the patient hands of those willing to decipher their meaning. Scientists quickly learned that the deeper you drill, the further you travel in time. Each meter of extracted ice is a journey backwards through vanished millennia, a gradual descent into chapters of Earth's autobiography, written in languages of isotope and element. With the right tools and a careful touch, researchers can peer into the days when volcanoes choked the sky, when oceans receded and continents shifted, when comet impacts cast a shadow across the globe. These frozen layers are impartial witnesses, recording every upheaval and every calm, their testimony silent but indelible. There is an almost sacred reverence in the way scientists handle core samples. Extracted from the heart of glaciers or the frozen soils of Siberia, these slender cylinders of ice are cradled as if they might shatter from the weight of what they carry. In sealed laboratories, behind double doors and within whispering cold rooms, teams assemble to unlock the mysteries within. The air is heavy with anticipation, for inside these transparent spirals lies information untouched by time, signals that survived global catastrophes, magnetic reversals, and the quiet passage of eons. Yet not everything within these frozen vaults is as tranquil as it appears. The ice entombs not just the peaceful relics of a bygone planet, but the aftermath of cataclysms, volcanic ash from eruptions that blotted out the sun, radioactive particles from cosmic events, even organic fragments left behind by creatures whose names have been lost to language. The further scientists look, the more they realize how much of what we call the past is still active, waiting for the right conditions to re-emerge. The ice, it turns out, is not merely preserving history, it is protecting the present from dangers the world has long forgotten. The allure of these archives is irresistible. For climate scientists, they are blueprints for understanding the fragility of our modern world. For biologists, they offer the chance to revive ancient organisms, to study viruses and bacteria that have not seen daylight for tens of thousands of years. For the dreamers and the cautious alike, the knowledge stored in the ice holds the potential to change everything, from our comprehension of life's resilience to the very boundaries of what is possible on Earth. What makes this natural archive so unique is its completeness. Unlike fossil beds, which capture only fragments, or written records, which are limited by human memory, the ice stores everything indiscriminately. It is a recorder that knows neither bias nor intent, a witness whose testimony cannot be falsified or edited. Each layer, each trapped molecule, offers a perspective untouched by interpretation, a record of what was, not what was imagined. This realization brings a humbling sense of awe. Standing above a borehole, watching as another gleaming cylinder is slowly lifted to the surface, it's easy to forget the outside world with its noise and distractions. Here, in the presence of Earth's oldest stories, time seems to blur. The boundaries between then and now dissolve. The only certainty is that each new discovery brings both answers and fresh questions, a reminder that the archives beneath our feet are as deep as our curiosity and our fears. As scientists peer deeper, sifting through the secrets of ages past, the line between observer and participant begins to fade. What we uncover from these frozen memories is never just passive knowledge. It is an invitation to see ourselves within the same grand narrative, to wonder what traces of our own era will someday be locked away, waiting to be found by future explorers with questions of their own. And always, in the hush of the research station, the feeling lingers that somewhere in the heart of the ice, a message is waiting, one that could change everything we believe about our world. It began with a restlessness that no textbook could satisfy, a hunger to reach beneath the surface, to touch the untouched. Those who volunteered for the first deep ice expeditions were not ordinary researchers. They were driven by a strange blend of courage, ambition, and the lure of the unknown, their imaginations fueled by whispers of what might be locked beneath the ancient ice. Preparation took years, the planning meticulous to the point of obsession. The ice was a formidable adversary, unpredictable and unyielding, and each miscalculation could mean disaster not just for the mission, but for everyone involved. No one forgot that the vast white emptiness above concealed a shifting, living world below. The initial teams assembled at the edge of civilization, in remote outposts where the sky seemed impossibly close and the cold pressed in from all sides. They were engineers, geologists, biologists, each bringing their own expertise, but all united by a single purpose. The machinery they brought with them looked almost alien against the pure white landscape. Towering drills, mobile labs mounted on tracked vehicles, sensors and cables snaking out across the ice like the roots of a giant searching tree. The first step was to select the precise spot. Months of satellite data and on-the-ground scouting narrowed the possibilities. The chosen site sat atop one of the oldest, thickest ice sheets on the planet, a place untouched for hundreds of thousands of years. The crew moved quickly to set up camp, fighting biting winds and temperatures that could turn breath into ice crystals mid-air. Each tent was a small universe of warmth and light against the overwhelming night. Then, with a mixture of ceremony and dread, the drilling began. The process was both brutal and delicate. Screaming engines boring downward, the metal teeth of the drill grinding through layer after layer, while every vibration and tremor was measured, recorded, and analyzed. The team kept careful logs, aware that even the smallest deviation could mean a lost sample or worse, an accident. Sometimes the drill would shudder, the sound echoing up through the ice like a warning from below. And the scientists would pause, listening for something they could not name. Not everything went as planned. The machinery froze more than once. Delicate sensors malfunctioned, and one night a blizzard swept in, nearly burying the entire operation under several feet of snow. There was an unspoken sense among the team that the environment itself was testing them, that the land did not easily surrender its secrets. Even the most seasoned explorers found themselves glancing at the horizon with unease, the stark beauty of the landscape now tinged with menace. As the days passed and the drill pressed ever deeper, oddities began to accumulate. Instruments recorded sudden fluctuations in temperature and pressure, small tremors that did not match any known seismic activity. In the silence between shifts, the team members shared stories of uneasy dreams and glimpses of movement at the edge of camp, shadows that vanished before they could be explained. Radios sometimes crackled with bursts of static, punctuated by brief, unintelligible sounds that no one could trace to any known source. Despite these growing anxieties, the work continued. Each new core sample was carefully extracted, logged, and transported to the makeshift laboratory. Under the harsh glare of portable lights, scientists sliced the cylinders into segments, their breath hanging in the frigid air. The ice looked ordinary at first, pure, flawless, blue, but within it, subtle striations and pockets hinted at a different reality. Here and there, flecks of ash spoke of ancient fires, while mysterious dark bands marked cataclysmic events from eons past. One evening, as twilight blurred the boundaries between sky and snow, the drill struck something unexpected. A deep, resonant vibration echoed upward, causing everyone to freeze. For a moment, no one moved. Then the ground shuddered, just enough to rattle equipment and nerves alike. The machinery sputtered and whined, and the sensors spiked with data that made no immediate sense. For the first time, a flicker of fear crept into the conversations that night, but no one wanted to be the first to voice it. As the drillers and scientists pressed on, a pattern began to emerge. It was subtle at first, just anomalies in the readings, odd shifts in the chemical composition of the deeper layers. But the deeper they went, the more pronounced the disturbances became. Instruments picked up faint magnetic pulses, irregular and rhythmic, as if something far below was beating out a message. Sleep became harder, and when it did come, it was filled with restless images of ancient shapes trapped in the darkness. Amid the technical setbacks and mounting tension, a realization grew. Whatever was hidden in the heart of the ice was not inert, not simply waiting to be cataloged. The team's excitement now battled with a quiet, insistent dread. The ice was not just a barrier, it was a warning, a threshold that perhaps should not be crossed. Still, the machinery pressed downward, and each new sample brought the unknown closer, transforming the expedition from a scientific venture into something altogether more haunting. No one dared say it aloud, but everyone sensed it, the feeling that they were not alone, that the ice was watching, listening, and waiting. Each day of the expedition began the same way: bitter cold, the faint crackle of radio static, the ritual of checking and rechecking equipment before the drills came to life. But beneath the routine, a quiet anticipation grew, sharpened by the knowledge that every hour brought them closer to another page in the planet's hidden history. The ice was not simply a challenge to overcome. It was a puzzle written in a language of crystal and shadow, and only the most careful, patient minds could hope to translate it. The technology used for drilling was a marvel in itself, the result of decades of innovation driven by the relentless desire to uncover the past. The main drill, a towering, segmented column of alloy and sensors, was designed to burrow straight down with almost surgical precision. Each rotation chewed through ancient snow, now compressed into solid ice, while an array of cameras and instruments mapped the journey in real time. A network of cables transmitted information to a command center where engineers and geologists monitored every vibration, every subtle change in pressure, ready to halt the operation at the first sign of danger. As the drill advanced, it extracted cylindrical cores, long, slender columns of ice gleaming in the harsh lights of the lab. The moment a new core emerged from the darkness below, the team gathered around, their breaths misting in the cold, all eyes searching for clues. Handling each core was an act of reverence. With gloved hands, they slid the cylinders into protective cases, careful not to let even a whisper of warmth disturb their fragile structure. The surface of the ice was often polished to a translucent sheen, but within, subtle bands and layers hinted at a universe of secrets. Every segment represented a discrete moment in the Earth's timeline. The outermost layers were young, mere centuries old, containing traces of volcanic eruptions remembered in recorded history, soot from industrial revolutions, even fallout from modern experiments. As the team moved deeper, each band became a window to eras no human had ever witnessed. Chemical analysis revealed the telltale signatures of ancient climates, sudden cold snaps, or periods of lush abundance. Trapped air bubbles, some barely the size of a pinhead, held the breath of mammoths and saber-toothed predators, the silent sighs of forests long vanished. The deeper they drilled, the more pronounced the changes became. The color of the ice shifted, subtle blues deepening to an almost ghostly gray. Certain layers shimmered with fine dust, microscopic remnants of distant deserts carried on ancient winds. Others bore the stains of cosmic events, thin veils of particles marking the moments when meteors shattered in the sky, or when the sun unleashed storms powerful enough to leave their mark on Earth's surface. Occasionally, a core would reveal a sudden boundary, a layer so sharply different from those above and below that it told of catastrophe, a volcanic winter, a rapid warming, a mysterious extinction. These were the milestones, the signposts of upheaval, each one demanding new questions and a deeper dive. Beyond the chemical and physical markers, there were biological traces too. In certain bands, the ice was laced with the shadows of life, pollen from extinct plants, single-celled organisms perfectly preserved, fragments of genetic material awaiting resurrection in the hands of modern science. Sometimes, the team discovered tiny black flecks embedded in the core, microbes that had survived in a suspended state for tens of thousands of years, their mysteries locked away in the cold. Every discovery blurred the boundary between past and present, between the living and the long lost. But for every answer the ice revealed, new riddles appeared. Patterns emerged that could not be explained by climate or catastrophe alone. Strange concentrations of certain chemicals, anomalous isotopes, the repeated presence of mysterious dark inclusions that defied easy categorization. Each puzzle pulled the team further into the depths, where the pressure mounted and the sense of something watching, waiting, only grew. As night fell over the camp and the world beyond receded into blackness, the scientists gathered to review the day's finds. The laboratory glowed with the cold light of computer screens and LED lamps, each core segment lined up like chapters in a book written by time itself. Every sample, every analysis was another sentence in a narrative that stretched back far beyond memory. There was a sense of crossing a threshold, of venturing into a story that had lain silent for ages, now trembling on the edge of revelation. The deeper the team went, the more the ice seemed to resist, cracking, moaning, sending up warnings from the depths, but the urge to understand, to uncover the truth, only sharpened. In the silence between shifts, some wondered if the ice might truly be alive in its own way, holding tight to its stories until the world was ready to hear them. Others, unable to sleep, stood outside beneath the shifting aurora, staring at the endless white and feeling the weight of all that had come before pressing up from below. Each layer, each step into the past brought the unknown closer. The ice was no longer just a substance or an obstacle. It had become a guide, a keeper of secrets, leading the expedition further into the heart of the world's most chilling mysteries. At first, the discoveries were met with hushed excitement. Each new ice core revealed hints of phenomena the team had only read about in academic journals, evidence of volcanic winters, the delicate tracings of ancient storms, the distant echoes of vanished climates. But it didn't take long before the pattern of routine findings gave way to a sense of unease, a quiet tension that crept into every conversation and lingered in the cold, thin air of the camp. It started subtly. Deep within a segment taken from an especially ancient layer, a field technician noticed a series of tiny shimmering bubbles suspended in the ice. They caught the light in a peculiar way, far brighter than the air pockets typically trapped during seasonal freezes. Curious, the team isolated several of the bubbles and, under the microscope, saw that they were unusually uniform, their surfaces almost perfectly smooth, as if shaped by an unknown hand. When samples were taken for analysis, the instruments registered gas compositions that didn't match any known atmospheric periods. The ratios of oxygen and nitrogen were off, with inexplicable traces of compounds not found in surface samples. The data was double-checked, then triple-checked, but the anomaly persisted. Then came the structures, forms that, at first glance, seemed like random impurities. But repeated samples began to tell a different story. Slender filaments appeared, faintly glowing under certain wavelengths, weaving through the ice in patterns too regular to be dismissed as coincidence. Some wound around the bubbles in spirals, while others branched off like roots seeking sustenance. It was as if the ice itself had preserved not only moments, but intentions, an organized complexity that suggested the involvement of life, or something very much like it. Excitement among the biologists quickly shifted into apprehension. With painstaking care, they extracted minuscule fragments from the core and placed them in culture mediums, hoping to coax any dormant life back into activity. For days, there was nothing. But then, almost imperceptibly, the samples changed. A faint cloudiness developed in the solution, followed by a slow, pulsing movement visible only under extreme magnification. What the team saw was unlike any microorganism cataloged in modern databases. Its cell walls flexible yet impossibly tough, its movements erratic, sometimes stalling for hours before flickering to life again. As news of the discovery spread through the camp, other anomalies began to surface. In one lab, a researcher noticed that certain layers of ice seemed resistant to melting, even when exposed to controlled heating. Another found that fragments stored in sealed containers occasionally produced faint, rhythmic noises, almost like a heartbeat amplified by the surrounding stillness. More troubling were the readings from the camp's environmental sensors, which began to fluctuate inexplicably in the vicinity of the newest samples, as if something in the ice was subtly altering the local environment. The atmosphere in the camp shifted. Where there had once been lively debate and laughter during meals, now conversations grew cautious and quiet. People spoke in whispers, glancing at each other with a mixture of anticipation and worry. A few joked about alien microbes and ancient plagues, but the humor never lasted long. The unspoken truth was that no one could explain what was happening, and in the absence of answers, fear began to take root. Night brought little relief. Some researchers found themselves haunted by vivid dreams of unfamiliar landscapes. Towering glaciers illuminated from within, vast networks of crystalline veins pulsing with a strange inner light. Others complained of headaches or chills that refused to fade, their bodies tense as if expecting an alarm that never sounded. A general sense of vigilance grew, with extra protocols for handling samples and new restrictions on who could access the deep core lab. More than once, the expedition leader called emergency meetings to review the situation. There was no consensus on how to proceed. Some argued that the samples should be sealed away until they could be studied in safer, better-equipped facilities. Others, driven by the hunger for discovery, pressed for more aggressive testing. No one wanted to admit just how far their apprehension had grown. In the midst of all this uncertainty, the ice cores continued to offer up their secrets. Each day brought more bubbles, more filaments, more questions. The sense of being watched, of something ancient stirring just beyond the reach of the light, became impossible to ignore. The team realized that they were no longer simply uncovering the past. They had stumbled upon a presence that was not content to remain silent. With every new finding, the line between scientific curiosity and primal dread blurred a little more, as if the ice itself was warning them that some doors, once opened, cannot easily be closed. The day the first of the ancient microbes awoke, a hush seemed to fall over the entire camp. It was the culmination of sleepless nights and anxious whispers, the kind of moment that scientists dream of and secretly fear. In the cramped, makeshift laboratory, a select few researchers had gathered around a sterile bench where the deepest ice core samples, those with the strangest bubbles and filaments, were being warmed and introduced to carefully prepared growth mediums. The temperature inside the containers was increased degree by degree, mimicking the slow thaw of a spring thousands of years ago. At first, nothing changed. The microscope fields remained static, the clear gels showed no movement. But as hours passed and the samples grew warmer, something began to shift. One of the researchers, fighting fatigue, nearly missed it. A faint shimmer, a minuscule movement on the edge of the glass. Magnification revealed the impossible. Inside the droplet, a structure unfolded, stretching with a twitch that looked alarmingly purposeful. Another cell followed, and another, the ancient life forms awakening as if in answer to some silent summons. The reactions in the lab were a mix of wonder and disbelief. Observing a microorganism that had been dormant for tens of thousands of years was a victory for science, the fulfillment of every bold hypothesis ever uttered in a lecture hall. Yet, under the glow of the monitors, excitement quickly curdled into unease. The cells were not like those in modern textbooks. Their outer membranes flexed and shifted in ways that seemed to defy known biology. Some grew flagella with impossible speed, others divided rapidly, displaying genetic arrangements that the team's sequencing software struggled to classify. Within hours, the samples went from dormancy to thriving colonies. Some cultures developed a shimmering oil-like sheen on their surfaces, while others began to emit faint bioluminescent glows, throwing eerie patterns onto the lab walls. More unsettling were the reactions to standard lab protocols. Antiseptic agents that would have stopped modern bacteria had little effect. Attempts to freeze the cultures back into stasis failed. After a period of inactivity, the microbes resumed movement, their metabolism resuming with almost predatory resilience. Worse still, some of the awakened bacteria seemed to interact with the laboratory environment in unexpected ways. One petri dish, left uncovered for a single minute during a shift change, soon displayed rapid contamination of nearby cultures, as if the ancient microbes had an instinct for seeking new hosts. Equipment began to fail more often, digital sensors misreading inputs or simply shutting down, prompting a flurry of repairs and recalibrations. More than once, a researcher complained of persistent static on the radios and a strange metallic tang in the air. When word spread beyond the lab, the effect was immediate and profound. Some team members, driven by curiosity, crowded in to watch the flickering organisms under the microscope, unable to tear themselves away despite a growing sense of dread. Others avoided the lab altogether, keeping their distance from the doors as if something inside could sense their presence. The atmosphere at mealtimes changed, voices dropping when the subject of the experiments came up, eyes darting nervously as if searching for some unseen threat. In the days that followed, new protocols were implemented with a sense of grim urgency. Quarantine zones were marked, samples doubled sealed, every precaution enforced with military discipline. Yet there was no consensus on whether the danger was real or imagined. Some insisted that the microbes posed no immediate threat to humans, that their biochemistry was so alien any risk would be negligible. Others, haunted by tales of ancient plagues, quietly feared the unknown capabilities of organisms that had survived untouched for longer than human history itself. The real terror crept in not through infection or dramatic outbreaks, but in subtle, creeping ways. Lab animals, brought for routine testing, began to display odd symptoms: restlessness, irregular heartbeats, unexplained lethargy. Plants, exposed to even tiny traces of the thawed cultures, showed abnormal growth patterns, curling leaves, and mottled discolorations. More than one scientist experienced mild but persistent headaches and strange, vivid dreams after spending long hours in the lab, as if the ancient life had found a way to reach beyond glass and steel. Still, the work pressed on. Data was sent back to universities and government agencies, encrypted and marked with urgent requests for analysis. Some argued to end the project, to destroy the samples and seal the camp. Others, transfixed by the potential for discovery, pushed forward, convinced they were on the verge of revelations that would change everything science believed about survival, evolution, and the fragile line between the past and the present. All the while, the bacteria thrived, indifferent to debate and fear, their slow awakening a reminder of how little the living world understood the full story written in the ice. With every pulse of the incubator and every new observation, the camp slipped further from certainty and deeper into a realm where the boundaries between curiosity and caution, triumph and terror had begun to blur almost beyond recognition. The deeper the team ventured into the genetic analysis of the revived microorganisms, the more reality seemed to slip away from the comfortable boundaries of established science. Samples were couriered from the main lab to a quarantined, high-security tent, where a separate group of geneticists worked in isolation, their screens glowing with sequences of letters and numbers that would challenge everything they thought they knew. At first, the process unfolded as expected. DNA was extracted, amplified, and fed into the sequencers. The anticipation in the tent was electric, each researcher hoping for some recognizable marker that would link these ancient beings to the tree of life. But the first results were confounding. Some stretches of DNA matched nothing in any known database. Other segments were so radically different from modern microbes that the algorithm struggled to even categorize them. Repeated cross-referencing against the genomes of bacteria, archaea, and even extremophiles, those hardy survivors of the planet's most hostile environments, yielded only partial overlaps, odd snippets here and there that suggested distant, improbable kinship, but never a clear connection. The remainder of the genetic code was a wilderness of uncharted data, filled with sequences that seemed to obey rules all their own. It was in this data that the real mysteries began to unfold. A handful of genes displayed patterns that defied the mechanisms understood by molecular biology. They spliced and reassembled themselves in unpredictable ways, forming proteins whose structures resembled nothing found in living organisms today. Some gene clusters contained repeating motifs that echoed like coded messages across eons, as if they were instructions left behind by something or someone who had anticipated being discovered far in the future. The geneticists debated endlessly, each finding more questions than answers with every new analysis. The more the team probed, the more certain they became that these microbes were not merely relics of ancient earthly life, but ambassadors from a time, or perhaps a place, where the rules were different. The theory of panspermia, once a fringe hypothesis, began to take on a new gravity. Had these genes arrived on Earth via meteorites, embedded in the cosmic dust that drifted down through the atmosphere before the ice formed? Or had the processes of evolution, left unchecked in the darkness and pressure of the ancient glaciers, wandered down such a strange path that the results now looked utterly alien? Some of the most unsettling discoveries emerged late at night, when exhausted researchers, driven by a mix of fear and fascination, compared notes over lukewarm coffee and flickering screens. One fragment of genetic code, isolated from a shimmering filament within the deepest core, displayed a series of repeating sequences that, when converted to sound waves, produced harmonic patterns, a biological music, eerily mathematical, as if the genome itself was carrying a message. Another gene cluster, when inserted into a harmless modern bacterium, triggered the production of a protein that curled and shimmered under the microscope, forming shapes that shifted with the faintest magnetic field, as if searching for a signal. These findings quickly left the realm of isolated anomalies. Reports were sent to university partners and government agencies, and soon coded messages began to arrive from distant labs. Requests for raw data, encrypted summaries, cautious warnings to proceed carefully. Some outside experts suggested contamination or errors in the sequencing, but repeated checks confirmed the results. The ice cores, it seemed, were yielding not just forgotten life, but fragments of a genetic language that might have originated beyond Earth. The implications were staggering and terrifying in equal measure. If these genes had indeed come from elsewhere, if the Earth's deepest ice held proof of life beyond our planet, what other secrets might still be buried, untouched, and waiting? The team found themselves looking differently at every bubble, every filament, every anomaly. The boundaries of biology had been pushed so far that they could no longer be sure where the familiar ended and the unknown began. Yet, even as the theories grew wilder, a practical, immediate tension crept through the camp. Was this new genetic material harmless curiosity, or could it pose a threat if it found its way into the wider world? No one knew. Every day, as more samples arrived from the drill and more strange sequences appeared on the screens, the line between discovery and dread became thinner, stretched almost to breaking. The ice, with its ancient, unreadable code, seemed to stare back at the scientists, daring them to keep going, to uncover truths that might change not only what they knew about the past, but what they believed about the future. As the days wore on and the ice cores yielded ever stranger secrets, the atmosphere in camp became charged with a tension that no amount of scientific procedure could dispel. Each new discovery seemed to carry the weight of centuries, bubbles with impossible chemistry, filaments that moved with a mindless purpose, genetic codes that hinted at origins outside all earthly charts. Amidst the hum of equipment and hurried analysis, another, older current began to seep through the team. The silent power of stories passed down through generations. Legends told in dark winters around fires or whispered by explorers whose maps ended at the edge of the white. At first, the connection was little more than a passing thought. Someone mentioned, almost as a joke, that the core samples reminded them of the cursed ice spoken of in the oral histories of far northern peoples. In the long nights, as researchers tried to shake the unease of unexplainable lab readings, the camp's multinational roster found comfort in conversation, sharing the folklore they'd grown up hearing. One told of the Chukchi stories from Siberia, where the land itself was said to punish those who dug too greedily, sending madness and bad luck to any who awakened what slept beneath the permafrost. Another remembered tales from Scandinavian ancestors about the Deep White, a sentient cold that kept the world's oldest and most dangerous things locked away. The more the team talked, the more parallels they began to find between their discoveries and the motifs running through these ancient stories. Legends from Greenland spoke of the Breathless Ones, entities frozen in the ice, whose return would bring strange winds and disease. Inuit myth described shape-shifting spirits that slipped from cracks in glaciers, haunting those who dared to disturb the resting places of the Old World. Even in the diaries of 19th-century explorers, there were entries filled with dread, accounts of night terrors, lost time, and the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes beneath the snow. What began as half-serious conversation grew into a thread that ran through the expedition's days and nights. There was an undeniable resonance between what the scientists now faced and the warnings embedded in those stories. The odd melodic patterns found in the recovered genes called to mind the songs of spirits meant to lull listeners into forgetting their way. The bacteria's resistance to the cold echoed the tales of sleeping giants who could only be roused by the reckless curiosity of mortals. Even the dreams that plagued some researchers, visions of glowing veins running through black ice, the muffled roar of something vast awakening below, seemed like echoes of old cautionary tales. As findings became more bizarre, the line between science and legend blurred further. Some team members began to approach the work with a wary respect, as if acknowledging that the stories had been warnings passed down by ancestors who'd seen more than they could understand. The new protocols, quarantines, isolation, extra barriers, felt less like modern safeguards and more like rituals meant to keep the old things contained. Discussions about the next steps grew quieter, with an unspoken agreement to treat the ice and its secrets as something more than just data.
The outside world, hungry for updates, was kept at a careful distance. When the first coded reports hinted at genetic anomalies unlike any terrestrial lineage, a handful of journalists dug up old expedition logs and folklore, spinning tales of ancient threats and the perils of hubris. But within the camp, the stories struck a different chord. They became a way to grapple with the growing sense that the expedition had crossed a threshold, not just of knowledge, but of respect for forces larger and older than any individual or institution. Late at night, as the aurora shifted and danced above the ice, the legends no longer felt like relics of a superstitious past. They felt eerily prescient, the ancient warnings replaying themselves as a living reality. The camp found itself suspended between two worlds, one ruled by data, evidence, and method, and the other shaped by story, intuition, and awe. And somewhere in the blinding white depths below, the truth waited, neither wholly scientific nor fully mythic, but a fusion of both, reminding those who listened that not all warnings are meant to be ignored. It was during a late-stage drilling operation, when the fatigue and anticipation had reached a fever pitch, that the team encountered the first unmistakable evidence of something beyond all expectation. The core, brought up in the early morning hours when the horizon glowed faintly violet, was heavier than usual, streaked with curious bands of amber and gray. It was so dense that two researchers had to steady it as it slid into the laboratory under the halogen lights, their breath visible in the air, hearts pounding with a premonition they could not yet name. As the protective casing was carefully removed, an immediate sense of awe fell over the room. Embedded within the ancient ice, visible through the crystalline matrix, were patterns that defied the usual chaos of geologic time. Running the length of the core were what appeared to be imprints, vast swirling ridges and bulbous protrusions that formed a repeating geometry, each curve and indentation so precise it seemed almost sculpted. At first, some argued it was a trick of the light, the result of pressure or mineral veins. But as the team rotated the cylinder under the microscope, doubt vanished. There were unmistakable signs of structure, of intention, an order that spoke not of random processes, but of life. News of the discovery spread through the camp like wildfire, drawing even the most skeptical engineers and biologists to the lab. There, beneath the harsh glare, the imprints resolved into what could only be described as traces of appendages, massive jointed segments, the suggestion of taloned claws or armored plates, and most astonishingly of all, the faint impression of a vast, multifaceted eye. The scale was enormous, dwarfing any known creature adapted to life in the cold. If it was a fossil, it was unlike anything in the record books. If it was something else, the possibilities were almost too much to consider.
Deeper cuts into the ice core revealed more. Strands of organic tissue so tough they dulled the blades, flecks of pigment that shimmered blue-green, and a fragment of what might have been bone, denser, darker, with a mineral composition that didn't fit any modern species. The fragment was run through every test available, but the machines returned only partial answers, as if the sample refused to be cataloged. There was no DNA the sequencers could recognize, no match to even the wildest database of prehistoric life. The data was both tantalizing and frustrating, opening new questions faster than they could be answered. The physical evidence accumulated, a single massive tooth perfectly preserved, its enamel patterned with tiny runes that suggested use or wear. Shards of what might have been a chitinous exoskeleton embedded with crystalline inclusions that sparkled under ultraviolet light. Microscopic examination revealed textures and structures unlike anything the biologists had seen. Complex lattices that hinted at sophisticated adaptations for an environment lost to time. These finds ignited fierce debate. Was this the remnant of an evolutionary dead end? A creature from a branch of life that perished without leaving descendants? Or was it evidence of something even stranger? Perhaps the very beings that inspired the legends which had haunted the camp. As word spread, old stories resurfaced, tales of ice-dwelling giants, the sleepers beneath the white, monsters whose movements could reshape glaciers and whose eyes could see in the darkness beneath the earth. The echoes of those myths, combined with the hard evidence before them, created an atmosphere of nervous awe. No one was prepared for what happened next. A sequence of imaging scans, performed at the request of a government agency monitoring the expedition, revealed what appeared to be a cluster of hibernating cells within the organic tissue, large, slow to respond, but undeniably alive in some dormant way. Suddenly, the team found themselves facing the real possibility that they had uncovered not just the remains of unknown giants, but the potential for resurrection, for the reawakening of an ancient ecosystem that science had never even imagined. The implications rippled through every part of the camp. The discovery was not merely academic. It forced a reckoning with the limits of human understanding, the recognition that life's history was vaster and stranger than any textbook dared admit. Some scientists became obsessed, barely sleeping as they tried to coax more information from the samples. Others grew cautious, even fearful, insisting on strict quarantine measures and secure storage, whispering at night about what might still be slumbering beneath the unbroken ice. Above all, the evidence was clear. The frozen depths held not only the echoes of lost ages, but the tangible presence of creatures that defied science. Giants whose size and structure hinted at worlds and times that no living person could comprehend. The sense of being watched, of treading on ground never meant to be disturbed, became stronger. And still, the drilling continued, drawing the team ever deeper into the realm where legend and reality no longer stood apart, and where every new find brought them closer to the moment when the ancient silence would finally be broken. In the weeks that followed the discovery of the giant imprints and mysterious organic fragments, the atmosphere around the expedition grew even more unsettled. Scientists tried to maintain a sense of control, burying themselves in analysis and procedure, but the feeling that something intangible was stirring beneath the ice would not leave them. As the drilling pressed on, deeper than ever before, the camp began to experience a new series of phenomena that defied simple explanation, as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched by the secrets slowly surfacing from the depths. It began with the instruments. At first, the changes were almost too subtle to notice. Slight inconsistencies in magnetic field readings, static-filled anomalies in the geophysical logs, background noise that didn't align with any known pattern. The base's magnetometers, usually so steady and reliable, started to show irregular fluctuations at odd intervals. Data plotted on screens formed jagged, erratic lines, sometimes synchronizing with the precise moments when a new core broke free from the ice below. The readings would then suddenly stabilize, only to spike again at unpredictable times, as if responding to something hidden and reactive deep underground. Audio sensors, set up to monitor vibrations from drilling and natural ice movement, began to record sounds that made even seasoned researchers uneasy. Most were faint, barely perceptible rumbles or distant pops, the sort of things that might be dismissed as shifts in the glacier. But occasionally, more complex patterns would emerge. Sequences of pulses at frequencies just outside normal human hearing, or rhythmic oscillations that seemed to echo the cadence of a living heartbeat. One night, as the wind howled and the sky shimmered with pale auroras, the entire team was startled awake by a deep, resonant hum that reverberated through the walls of the main lab. The source was impossible to pinpoint. The sound faded almost as soon as it began, leaving only a low vibration in the floor and an after-image of dread in the minds of those who heard it. As days passed, other forms of interference made themselves known. Wireless communications grew unreliable, with static bursts and scrambled signals appearing at random. Devices that had worked flawlessly for weeks now faltered, refusing to hold a charge or emitting high-pitched whines that set nerves on edge. Satellite links flickered, making contact with the outside world an ordeal of patience and frustration. More than once, entire datasets were lost in a sudden surge of electromagnetic noise, wiped clean as if by an unseen hand. Physical phenomena accompanied these technical mysteries. The aurora above the camp intensified, twisting into unfamiliar shapes and colors, lighting up the sky with jagged bursts that seemed to correspond with the strange readings below. Static electricity built up to the point that researchers received shocks simply by touching door handles or the metal frames of their beds. Compass needles spun lazily before settling, always just a few degrees off true north, as though drawn to some other, invisible pole deep under the ice. Amid the technological chaos, the team's collective mood shifted. Anxiety took root as some researchers reported disturbing dreams, soundless visions of deep, echoing chambers beneath the glacier, or vast, dark shapes swimming in a slow, silent procession. A few even claimed to hear faint whispers late at night, voices that seemed to ride on the wind, urging them toward the borehole or warning them away. Sleep became elusive, and fatigue sharpened the sense of vulnerability, turning every unexplained flicker or vibration into a possible omen. Efforts to rationalize the events fell short. Specialists in geomagnetism and acoustics reviewed the data, but nothing fit known models. Theories ranged from previously undiscovered seismic faults to rare interactions between solar particles and the unique mineral content of the ice. Yet, none could account for the direct timing of these anomalies with each major breakthrough: the discovery of new fossils, the unsealing of ancient gas bubbles, the thawing of the unknown microbes.
The more the ice revealed, the clearer it became that something below was not just ancient, but active in ways that eluded modern understanding. The signals, whatever their source, seemed to respond to human presence and curiosity, as if the ice itself was a living conduit, amplifying echoes from a past not yet ready to be forgotten. The scientists found themselves caught in a growing web of cause and effect, the border between observer and participant blurring with each new anomaly. The signals, both magnetic and acoustic, grew more frequent and intense as the drilling went deeper. It was as if the heart of the glacier was sending messages, warnings, invitations, or perhaps even cries for help. The team pressed on, driven by a mixture of fascination and fear, knowing they were approaching a threshold where answers awaited, but so too did new questions, darker and more profound than any they had faced before. In the silent, icy dark, every pulse and echo was a reminder that their quest for knowledge had awakened forces beyond comprehension, and that some mysteries, once disturbed, may never return to quiet slumber. By morning, Helen's headache had intensified, accompanied by a creeping sense of nausea and a fever that burned despite the freezing air outside. She tried to dismiss the symptoms as a common cold or the result of overwork, but her condition worsened rapidly. When she arrived at the lab, her hands shook so violently that she dropped a tray of samples, shattering the uneasy silence that had settled over the team. Alarmed, her colleagues insisted she see the expedition's medic, who immediately recognized the severity of her symptoms and activated the camp's emergency protocols. Helen was isolated in a sealed section of the medical tent, her contact with others limited to brief check-ins by staff in full protective gear. The team moved quickly to trace the source of her illness, reviewing lab footage and decontamination logs until the moment of contact was identified. The news spread through the camp like wildfire, stoking the underlying fear that had grown with every new discovery. Was this the first sign that the ancient microbes were not only alive, but capable of interacting with human biology in ways no one had predicted? As Helen's fever climbed, so did the tension within the camp. Researchers who had handled the same samples underwent immediate testing, while the affected workstations were sealed and sterilized. The medical team documented Helen's symptoms with increasing concern: high fever, severe headaches, persistent chills, and a rash that spread in intricate, branching patterns across her skin. Blood work revealed markers no one had seen before: strange proteins, irregular white cell counts, and a rapid mutation of certain cells that defied known disease models. Her condition fluctuated unpredictably. One hour she would seem to recover, asking for water and joking weakly with the medic. The next, she would slip into delirium, eyes wide with confusion, murmuring about lights and voices only she could see. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. The once busy camp became eerily quiet, conversation replaced by nervous glances and whispered debates over whether to continue the expedition.
Some demanded an immediate evacuation, while others argued that abandoning the project would doom any hope of understanding the risks they faced. The line between caution and panic grew thin. A few researchers, especially those closest to Helen, began to experience phantom symptoms: aches, shivers, nightmares filled with the echoing hums that had haunted the camp for weeks.
Medical teams from outside bases were consulted via stuttering satellite links, offering little more than generic advice and dire warnings to isolate any further cases. Experimental antivirals were administered, but Helen's body seemed to resist all efforts, the ancient pathogen adapting faster than the treatments could keep pace. The expedition's leaders faced an impossible choice: protect the integrity of the samples and risk a wider outbreak, or destroy years of priceless research in a desperate attempt to contain the unknown. As days stretched into a tense, anxious blur, Helen's condition stabilized, though she remained weak and haunted by dreams she refused to describe. The outbreak, for now, had not spread, but the sense of safety in the camp was irrevocably broken. Extra precautions became routine, movement was strictly monitored, and every cough or complaint was met with wary suspicion. The shadow of infection lingered over the camp, a silent reminder that the boundaries between past and present, between discovery and danger, had been breached. Most unsettling of all was the knowledge that they were still only at the beginning of their journey. If the ice could yield something so insidious and adaptable, what else might wait below, dormant, patient, and utterly indifferent to human hopes or fears? For the first time, the scientists looked at the endless white not just as an archive of history, but as a living, shifting frontier, one that could reach out and touch them in ways no one was prepared to imagine. The news of the incident at the Polar Research Camp spread far beyond the snowbound tents and flickering lab lights. At first, it was little more than a rumor, a single encrypted transmission to a university partner, a whispered warning to tighten laboratory protocols worldwide. But secrets have a way of escaping into the light, especially when they carry the flavor of danger, the thrill of discovery, and the specter of uncontrollable risk. Within days, word of the infection and the strange properties of the ancient ice samples was circulating among global research networks, igniting a storm that no one could contain. In academic circles, the initial response was disbelief, quickly giving way to a frenzy of debate and accusation. Prominent virologists and microbiologists published open letters demanding full transparency from the expedition, their words sharpened by fear and curiosity. Others, skeptical of anything that sounded too much like science fiction, dismissed the reports as exaggerated or the result of sloppy containment. Heated arguments erupted on closed forums and at international conferences, where the question was no longer just what had been found, but who should have the right to study it and at what cost. Government agencies, never far from the scent of a crisis, moved quickly to assert control. Funding bodies threatened to cut grants unless all data was shared immediately. Intelligence services began to monitor communications in and out of the camp, seeking any sign that a biothreat might escape into the wider world. Legal teams prepared statements for every possibility, from accidental exposure to deliberate sabotage. Behind the scenes, frantic negotiations unfolded. Some researchers offered secret access to raw data in exchange for promises of continued funding, while others leaked preliminary results to journalists in the hope of forcing greater openness. The media, hungry for headlines, latched onto the story with predictable vigor. Overnight, the world was flooded with sensational reports, ancient plagues awakening beneath the ice, scientists playing with forces they could not control, government conspiracies to weaponize prehistoric bacteria. Photos of the camp, taken by drones and satellites, circulated alongside wild speculation about secret bunkers and buried monsters. Even the most sober scientists found themselves fielding questions about the next great extinction from nervous reporters, their words often twisted beyond recognition by the time they appeared in print. In laboratories around the globe, security procedures tightened. High containment labs were flooded with requests for analysis and collaboration. Some researchers, once eager to join the excitement, now hesitated, afraid of being caught up in a controversy that could threaten their careers or reputations. Rivalries flared as teams raced to publish first, sometimes accusing each other of withholding evidence or sabotaging experiments. The spirit of scientific cooperation began to fracture, replaced by suspicion and competition as the stakes grew ever higher. Within the original camp, the atmosphere was transformed. Communication with the outside world became a minefield, every message scrutinized and encrypted, every call monitored for leaks. Leadership argued constantly over whether to open their data to the world or hold it close, fearing misuse or misinterpretation. Paranoia set in as the team divided into camps, those advocating for openness, believing that global collaboration was the only way to manage the risks, and those insisting on secrecy, convinced that some discoveries were too dangerous for public consumption. Funding became both a weapon and a lifeline. Governments and private foundations dangled millions of dollars for exclusive access, while others threatened to withdraw all support if transparency was not guaranteed. Research priorities shifted overnight. Some projects were shut down, others expanded, and researchers found themselves navigating a maze of shifting allegiances and hidden agendas. Old friendships strained under the weight of suspicion. Careers rose and fell with every new headline, every whispered revelation. Then came the inevitable leaks. Confidential documents appeared on anonymous forums. Partial genetic sequences, internal memos about the first infection, photographs of ice cores bearing impossible imprints. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Fact and fiction blurred as amateur analysts and conspiracy theorists dissected every detail, spinning new narratives with every hour. Calls for international oversight grew louder, met with resistance from nations who saw only the promise of technological or military advantage. The scientific community, once united in curiosity and ambition, found itself caught in a storm of panic and pride, secrecy and exposure. The story of what was hidden in the ancient ice had escaped the cold silence of the glacier and ignited a global fire. And now there was no turning back. Every day brought fresh headlines, new alliances, more questions, and the uneasy certainty that the world had crossed a line. That whatever lay beneath the ice was no longer just a mystery for a handful of scientists, but a challenge and a warning for all of humanity. In the shadow of mounting controversy and the roar of headlines, the research pressed on. Despite the fractured trust and looming threat of outside intervention, the camp's core team turned their focus inward, determined to understand the true nature of what they had awakened. The ancient bacteria, once mere curiosities under the lens, now demanded attention for a far more urgent reason. They were changing, quickly, unpredictably, and with a tenacity that unsettled even the most seasoned microbiologists. It started in the isolation lab, where revived microbial colonies were kept under the strictest containment protocols. At first, the cultures behaved as expected, slow to grow, responding only to precise conditions mimicking the warmth and humidity of their prehistoric origins. But as the days passed, subtle changes appeared.
Colonies that should have remained dormant began dividing at exponential rates, their cell walls thickening and branching in unfamiliar patterns. DNA sequencing revealed alarming mutations, sections of the genome that shifted with each new generation, forming entirely novel proteins that defied known biological rules. Some bacteria developed an unexpected resistance to all forms of antibacteria and biocides tested against them. Compounds designed to shatter cell walls or disrupt internal chemistry had little effect. If anything, exposure seemed to spur the microbes into more rapid adaptation. A harmless-looking colony, once isolated as a control, suddenly grew extensions, delicate filaments that sought out neighboring cultures, infiltrating petri dishes with a speed and precision that made the researchers uneasy. It was as if the ancient genes were not only awake, but eager to meet their new environment, evolving with a flexibility modern pathogens could only dream of. The most alarming discoveries occurred when the team introduced the bacteria to simple model organisms. Fruit flies, exposed to even minute traces of the ancient microbes, developed strange deformities. Wings fused together, abnormal pigmentation, nervous systems behaving erratically. Plant seedlings placed near the cultures showed curling leaves and hyperactive root growth, with cells multiplying in chaotic tumorous clusters. One series of tests, intended as a routine examination, was abruptly halted when a lab mouse exhibited uncharacteristic aggression and tremors after accidental contact with contaminated bedding. Within hours, the animal's tissues were found to be riddled with bacterial cells, some of which had already mutated into new forms. Data streamed in, filling gigabytes of lab drives with evidence of a mutational rate orders of magnitude beyond what was considered possible. Genes swapped and rearranged themselves, forming hybrid sequences with the DNA of whatever organism they encountered. Virologists watching the results argued over whether they were witnessing a new type of gene transfer altogether, one that ignored traditional boundaries and left room for no natural defense. The camp scrambled to adapt. Biohazard protocols grew stricter. Experiments were halted or moved into higher containment units. Every surface was sanitized multiple times each day, and researchers wore layered suits and masks, though no one felt truly safe. In nightly meetings, debate raged over what to do: destroy the samples and erase the data, or continue, driven by the grim fascination of scientific discovery. Some, already unnerved by the outbreak weeks before, found themselves questioning whether the team could control what they had released or whether it was already too late. The mutations in the ancient bacteria were no longer just a theoretical risk, they were a living, shifting threat. The speed at which the microbes adapted to new challenges was breathtaking, suggesting an evolutionary history shaped by unimaginable pressures. The team realized, with growing horror, that what had survived for tens of thousands of years in the silent dark had not merely endured, it had prepared, becoming something the world was utterly unready to face. As the days blurred into anxious repetition, the possibility of a breach weighed on everyone. A single misstep, a tear in a glove, a drop of condensation slipping from a lab ceiling could unleash something unstoppable. The bacteria seemed to sense every effort to contain them, probing for new weaknesses, mutating in anticipation of the next test. In the quiet between alarms and decontaminations, some researchers whispered about stopping the work, sealing away the samples, and retreating to safety. Others, haunted by the promise of discovery,
could not look away. In the end, the ancient microbes, so small, so silent, held the power to force the team's hand. Each new mutation was a warning that control was slipping, that the line between the safety of the lab and the chaos of the outside world was growing dangerously thin. And still the ice loomed outside, vast and indifferent, holding secrets the team had only begun to awaken. With the next mutation, perhaps already forming, silent and unseen, within a glass vial in the coldest corner of the camp. The relentless cascade of mutations and the growing sense that the ancient bacteria could not be controlled did not go unnoticed by those far beyond the ice. As word of the camp's discoveries leaked into the world, shadowy interests began to circle, watching, probing, and quietly intervening. What had started as a pure scientific expedition gradually took on the tense atmosphere of a high-stakes standoff, with research reports and genetic sequences flowing through encrypted channels. It was not long before the first signs of outside involvement appeared. A supply plane arrived weeks ahead of schedule, carrying nondescript crates stamped with ambiguous government seals. New faces joined the expedition, technicians who said little, asked pointed questions, and spent most of their time installing equipment that was never explained to the original team. Communication with the outside world became more tightly controlled. All outgoing messages were now routed through a central terminal, guarded around the clock by personnel whose badges bore no university or research agency insignia. In private, the scientists speculated about the growing presence of these outsiders. Some believed they were sent to protect the world from an accidental outbreak. Others, more cynical, saw the signs of an attempt to harness the microbes' unique properties for military use. Tensions simmered as the visitors began to request, then demand, access to the most sensitive data, samples, and experimental protocols. Each day brought new directives, more restrictions, and a growing sense that the camp had become both a laboratory and a prison. The focus of research subtly shifted. Some of the new experiments, dictated from above, were not aimed at understanding the origins of the bacteria or preventing contamination, but at testing their limits. Could they survive extreme radiation? How quickly did they adapt to nerve agents, toxins, or simulated wounds? Were there ways to accelerate their mutational cycles, to select for even greater resilience or aggression? The original team was unsettled by these questions, but in the face of pressure and surveillance, few dared to protest openly. Whispers of classified military projects, biological defense programs, covert weapons initiatives began to echo through the camp. Old friends found themselves on opposite sides, some trying to sabotage the more dangerous experiments, others drawn into secret meetings with the new arrivals. The scientists' notebooks, once filled with the excitement of discovery, now contained records of access logs, surveillance rotations, and the cryptic code names of shadow projects. Morale plummeted. The thrill of unlocking ancient mysteries was replaced by an unspoken dread of what might be unleashed. Some team members tried to transmit warnings to colleagues abroad, using coded language in scientific updates or slipping encrypted messages into the camp's daily transmissions. A handful considered destroying the most dangerous samples, but found themselves blocked at every turn. Locks reprogrammed, storage units guarded, digital files backed up to servers far from the ice.
Even the environment began to feel complicit in the secrecy.
Helicopters landed at odd hours, their rotors churning up snow while anonymous officials hustled away sealed coolers and briefcases. Equipment was dismantled, then rebuilt according to blueprints no one had seen before. When questions arose about the ethics of the work, the answers were cold, bureaucratic, and final. The safety of the nation, the world, required absolute control and secrecy. At night, those who remembered why they had come in the first place gathered in quiet corners of the mess tent, sharing stories of the early days and what had been lost. They wondered if the ice itself was indifferent to the ambitions of those who walked its surface, or if it kept its own counsel, watching and waiting as new hands vied for power over its most ancient secrets. Beneath the harsh glare of military spotlights, the microbes continued to adapt, mutate, and survive, their existence now entangled in the ambitions of generals and ministers far away. What had begun as a quest for knowledge had become a game of control, a struggle where every breakthrough carried the weight of a threat. The camp stood poised on the edge of a new and more dangerous unknown, the line between discovery and disaster thinner than ever, while, deep below, the ancient ice kept its silence, holding within it the promise of revelations and consequences that no force on earth could truly master. The sense of unease that had permeated the camp for weeks finally ruptured one frigid night, transforming tension into chaos. It began with an alarm, sharp, metallic, echoing through the steel corridors, just as a storm howled across the ice, rattling walls and swallowing the world in swirling white. For a moment, everyone thought it was another drill, the kind introduced by the new security protocols. But then came the unmistakable odor of burning insulation and the flicker of emergency lights cutting through the gloom, painting every face with a grim crimson glow. In the containment wing, a malfunctioning environmental control unit, recently refitted by outside contractors, overheated, shorting out backup power to several isolation chambers. The sudden drop in temperature should have halted any microbial activity. Instead, the alarms indicated a surge in pressure, as if something within the sealed samples was expanding, reacting violently to the abrupt change. Monitors blinked with cascading error messages. Automatic locks engaged, trapping several researchers inside the restricted lab zone with the samples they'd spent months trying to understand. On the far side of the compound, backup generators roared to life, but the transfer of power was slow, uneven. Flickering lights revealed smoke pouring from an electrical panel. Radios filled with overlapping voices, frantic requests for assistance, terse instructions in clipped accents, rising panic as the true scale of the disaster became clear. In the medical tent, an isolation chamber's seal buckled, unable to withstand the pressure. Air hissed out, followed by a burst of freezing mist. Sirens howled anew as sensors detected an uncontained biological agent in the ventilation system. The response was immediate but fragmented. Security teams, masked and armored, swept into the labs, issuing orders to evacuate non-essential personnel while trying to restore containment. But the maze of hallways, now choked with smoke and flashing lights, was almost impossible to navigate. Several scientists, disoriented and coughing, found themselves in storage bays instead of safe zones, separated from colleagues by locked fire doors and electronic checkpoints that refused to open. Somewhere in the confusion, a technician slipped on an icy floor, dropping a tray of vials that shattered and sent droplets of iridescent fluid skittering across the tiles. Word spread that a small group was still trapped inside the main containment lab. Among them, Dr. Helen Mason, now half recovered from her illness and desperately working to stabilize the temperature controls. Through fogged glass, she could see the ancient bacterial colonies reacting to the chaos. Some retreated, forming hard crystalline shells. Others surged forward, blooming into clouds of suspended cells that clung to every surface. The containment team outside argued over whether to attempt a rescue or seal the wing entirely, sacrificing those inside to prevent an even greater outbreak. As the storm raged outside, the disaster escalated. Automated fire suppression flooded parts of the station with freezing foam, but the foam mixed unpredictably with the experimental agents, triggering chemical reactions that nobody had anticipated. Alarms blared warnings of contamination in air vents, storage rooms, even the mess hall. The wind pounded at the walls, shaking the entire structure with an almost sentient fury. In one corridor, a group of scientists, faces hidden by fogged goggles, forced open an emergency hatch only to be met with a wall of blinding snow and howling wind. Their cries vanished into the white, lost to the night.
Within hours, the entire station was a tableau of confusion. Corridors swirling with mist, red and white lights strobing in chaotic patterns, figures hurrying through half-frozen doors with bundles of samples or survival gear. In a desperate bid to contain the disaster, leadership made the call to initiate the final protocol, a complete lockdown, with all vents, exits, and non-essential systems sealed until help could arrive. The order went out, but implementation was partial at best. The old structure buckled under the strain, alarms competing with the rising wind and the terrified voices crackling over failing radios. Through it all, the microbes continued to spread, slipping past failed seals and compromised filters, thriving in the chaos their emergence had wrought. By dawn, the worst of the storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the faint hum of emergency power and the distant, echoing drip of melting ice. Outside, a rescue team prepared for a hazardous entry, but those inside the camp already knew something irreversible had happened. The ancient ice had finally yielded its secrets, and in the frenzy of disaster, control had been lost, perhaps forever. The point of no return was behind them, its shadow stretching across the snow. In every corner of the battered station, there was the bitter certainty that the world beyond the ice would never be the same. When the first light of day broke over the horizon, it revealed a camp transformed, a once orderly outpost now fractured by chaos, fear, and the relentless encroachment of cold. The storm had subsided, but inside the shattered station, a different kind of danger spread with silent determination. Doors meant to keep out the elements now barred the way to safety. Emergency lights cast flickering shadows along the narrow corridors, each footstep echoing with the memory of alarms and shouts that had faded into uneasy silence. Those who had survived the night gathered in the central atrium, a place that had once been filled with the hum of routine and camaraderie, but was now reduced to a tense huddle of pale, hollow-eyed faces. The surviving team, scientists, technicians, security, and a handful of the outside personnel, reviewed their dwindling supplies and patchy communications. Their isolation was total. Satellite links were dead, backup radios only hissed with static, and every possible escape route was either blocked by fallen beams, frozen over by drifting snow, or tainted by the potential spread of the ancient, mutating microbes. There was no time for debate. Sensors indicated that contaminated air had reached most of the ventilation system, and several sectors were already registering temperatures so low that frost crawled across computer screens and door handles. The last uninfected zones, where the air still tasted faintly metallic but breathable, were shrinking with every passing hour. Beyond those thin barriers, the very walls seemed to pulse and groan with a life of their own, the result, some suspected, of the microbial colonies adapting yet again, thriving in the chaos and cold. In the hurried council that followed, Dr. Mason, still weak but driven by a sense of purpose stronger than fear, outlined the only plan that offered a chance at survival. The main garage, she explained, housed several all-terrain vehicles, still fueled and fitted for emergency egress. But to reach them, the group would have to cross the contaminated labs, pass through the outer storage annex, and finally brave the storm-scoured landscape that lay beyond the walls. Every step would bring them closer to the edge of the outbreak, into areas where the ancient life forms had already proven their ability to adapt, resist, and hunt in silence. Clad in layered clothing, makeshift respirators, and cobbled-together protective gear, the survivors set out in small teams. The air was thick with frost and the tang of disinfectants, punctuated by the occasional hiss of a ruptured pipe or the groan of overburdened walls. In the contaminated labs, every surface shimmered with a thin film of biofilm, sometimes pulsing with faint, ghostly light. Gloved hands gripped flashlights and axes as the teams advanced, eyes darting to the walls, floors, and ceilings for any sign of movement, knowing now that the microbes, or whatever larger organisms they might have awakened, could be hiding anywhere. More than once, their passage triggered strange reactions. Freezing mists billowed from cracked vents, coiling around ankles and fogging visors. At one junction, the group stumbled upon a shattered containment chamber, its glass etched with intricate, almost organic patterns. Within, strange tendrils clung to the walls, moving with sluggish purpose, retreating from the light. Someone dropped a sample case, and for a terrifying moment, the world shrank to the sound of shuffling feet and frantic breathing, until Dr. Mason's voice cut through the fear, urging everyone onward.
Reaching the storage annex meant passing through a zone where the temperature had dropped so far that even breath turned instantly to ice. The floor was slick, littered with abandoned equipment and half-opened cases of supplies. The group moved quickly, every second outside the relative warmth of the suits a gamble with hypothermia. Yet in the stillness, a different kind of menace lurked, the knowledge that any cut, any torn glove could invite the ancient microbes into living tissue. One technician, stumbling in exhaustion, fell and gasped as her visor cracked, exposing her face to the freezing air. She was quickly bundled up and isolated, fear in her eyes as she pleaded to be left behind if things worsened. At last, they reached the garage. The air here was almost as cold as outside, and frost coated the windshields of the vehicles, but the engines responded to the desperate touch of the survivors, coughing and then roaring to life. Through the small windows, the world was nothing but a featureless field of white and swirling snow. With a final grim count of survivors and supplies, the group climbed into the vehicles, sealing themselves inside as best they could. The engine struggled against the cold, tires churning through drifts that threatened to swallow them whole. The compound shrank into the distance, a battered silhouette on the empty plain as the convoy picked its way toward the distant promise of another research station, or perhaps just a safer patch of ice. Inside the vehicles, no one spoke. Breath fogged the glass, and eyes flickered from the dark horizon to the readouts on radiation and biohazard sensors. There was no certainty, only motion, a desperate escape into the unknown, leaving behind a station transformed by secrets that should have stayed buried. The ancient cold pressed in on all sides, but ahead lay the thin hope of survival, the last line between humanity and the darkness now stirring in the heart of the world's forgotten white. As the battered vehicles rattled across the wide expanse, the survivors were left with no choice but to confront the silence that settled in their wake. It was not merely the isolation, nor the relentless cold, nor even the persistent threat of the ancient microbes that pressed upon their minds. It was something subtler, a mounting pressure that made every moment feel like the prologue to disaster. Fear was no longer just a response to the external. It seeped inward, reshaping reality itself, until each survivor carried not only the weight of memory, but the gnawing suspicion that their very perceptions could no longer be trusted. Sleep, if it came at all, was fitful and haunted. In the cramped quarters of the idling vehicles, eyes flickered open at the slightest noise: a pop in the ice, a whine from the engine, a cough muffled beneath layers of scarves and masks. Nightmares threaded through the hours, always vivid, always personal. Some dreamed of endless tunnels beneath the ice, their walls pulsing with unnatural life. Others saw figures moving at the edge of their vision, faces both familiar and impossibly distorted. In these dreams, the rules of the waking world dissolved. Gravity shifted, time unraveled, and words whispered in languages no one had ever spoken before. Even in waking hours, reality twisted. Subtle, persistent hallucinations crept in. A flicker of movement outside the window that vanished upon closer inspection. Strange patterns appearing in frost on the glass. Sounds that seemed to echo from beneath the floor. Dr. Mason, trying to record her thoughts in a battered journal, found her handwriting slipping into patterns she didn't remember learning. Loops and symbols that looked eerily like the markings on the recovered samples. Another survivor, a young technician named Sato, confessed in a broken voice that he sometimes saw the walls breathing, exhaling a cold mist that fogged his vision and filled his lungs with dread. Paranoia grew in tandem with these disturbances. The survivors watched each other with new caution, eyes flickering with unspoken questions. Was that cough just a cough? Was the technician's hesitation at the controls a sign of fear or something worse? With every hour, trust became a fragile thing, easily shattered by suspicion or an errant word. Arguments flared over trivial matters: routes, rations, the allocation of precious heat. Accusations were whispered in the dark, only to be hastily denied in the light. But the seeds of doubt had already taken root. Attempts to explain the growing unease fell flat. Some blamed exhaustion, or the side effects of the emergency medications distributed after the escape. Others whispered that perhaps the ancient organisms were doing more than attacking the body. They were rewriting perception itself, reaching into the deepest folds of the mind. The symptoms echoed those documented in folklore and the earliest expedition logs: the ice madness, the white fever, visions of the deep. The survivors could no longer dismiss these tales as superstition. Every flicker of movement, every unaccountable chill, became evidence that the old boundaries between the mind and the outside world were eroding. Communication, when it happened, was halting and tense. Messages relayed between vehicles were brief, clipped, devoid of comfort. Each survivor retreated into themselves, clinging to routines or rituals, a particular way of lacing boots, a half-remembered melody hummed beneath a breath to hold back the encroaching sense of dissolution. Yet even these small comforts offered little protection when reality itself seemed to be shifting, when a reflection in the glass lingered a moment too long, or a voice on the radio sounded subtly, chillingly wrong. In the white void, the mind became its own battleground. Every fear, every memory, every doubt magnified against the endless silence, until the difference between hallucination and reality was no longer clear. The ancient ice, it seemed, had one last secret. It could reach not just through time and space, but into the very core of what it meant to be human. The survivors pressed onward, their thoughts spiraling and colliding in the dark, each aware that the line between self and other, between the world within and the world without, was thinning with every passing hour. And still ahead of them, the cold waited, unblinking, eternal, patient, while the final truths lingered just out of sight, beyond the next rise of the frozen earth. As the days dragged on and the convoy of survivors pressed deeper into the desolation, something ancient and irrational began to surface within them, an unease older than memory, impossible to chart with any instrument. The boundaries between the empirical and the inexplicable blurred, each new hour eroding the certainty that reality could be measured, catalogued, or controlled. The land outside the frozen windows was unchanged, white, endless, and silent. But inside the minds of those who had trespassed upon its oldest secrets, a storm was gathering. It began quietly. In the early hours, huddled together in the dim glow of their vehicle's dashboard, a few of the survivors found themselves whispering stories they had never fully believed. Dr. Mason, her logical mind worn thin by sleeplessness and fear, remembered the tales shared in the camp before everything unraveled, of ancient gods entombed in the ice, guardians of thresholds not meant to be crossed. Sato, haunted by visions and strange symbols, recounted a legend from his childhood, a being who slept beneath the snow and punished those who disturbed its rest with madness and misfortune. What had once been dismissed as superstition now felt like prophecy. The uncanny events, the unexplainable signals, the relentless mutations, the hallucinations, and the way the ice itself seemed to whisper, took on a new, more sinister meaning. More than one survivor began to wonder aloud if science had crossed a boundary marked not only by the limits of knowledge, but by an ancient warning. The microbes, the fossils, the strange energies and dreamlike phenomena all seemed to point to an intelligence that transcended natural law, something that watched and responded to every intrusion. The words curse and punishment slipped into conversation, at first as nervous jokes, then with growing seriousness. Charts and notes, once covered in tidy numbers and chemical symbols, now bore the marks of desperation. Drawings of spirals and eyes, prayers in forgotten languages, frantic attempts to appease what could not be understood. Some survivors, caught between hope and dread, left offerings on the dashboard, a scrap of food, a carved talisman, anything to ward off the gaze of the unseen forces they felt pressing in from the cold. When the aurora flared overhead, brighter and stranger than before, some dropped to their knees in silent terror, convinced they were witnessing an omen. Patterns appeared in the snow, delicate geometric shapes and sprawling lines, too precise to be the work of wind or chance. One night, a technician awoke to find a line of footprints leading away from the convoy, each print deeper and more distorted than the last, disappearing into a swirl of untouched drifts. As the rational world crumbled, the survivors' minds became battlegrounds between logic and myth. Dr. Mason tried to anchor herself in data, but her own notes betrayed her. Calculations that changed when she looked away, results that defied the laws of thermodynamics and returned again and again to the same cryptic figures, the same names whispered in old stories. Sato, clutching a talisman carved from a fragment of ancient bone, confessed he sometimes heard music in the wind, a melody that promised oblivion or revelation, depending on how it was answered. The further they traveled, the more convinced they became that the ice was not just a natural archive, but a boundary stone between worlds, a place where old powers slept, and the arrogance of the present could summon them back into waking. Science and myth collided in the minds of the survivors, each discovery twisting into a warning, every unexplained event a sign that their ordeal was not just physical, but spiritual, a test they might never have been meant to survive. No one dared to say it aloud, but the truth pressed on them from every side. They had not only awakened ancient life, but disturbed the uneasy balance between what was known and what was meant to remain a mystery. The curse of the old gods, once a bedtime story for frightened children, had become the shadow beneath every breath, the cold intelligence that waited beyond the firelight. The line between fact and faith, evidence and omen, had been erased by the white silence, leaving only the chilling certainty that some boundaries, once crossed, can never redrawn. By the time the first rescue signals flickered through the static, the survivors were already changed, marked by the things they'd seen and the silent burdens they carried. When government aircraft finally appeared on the horizon, trailing plumes of snow and light, there was no sense of relief, only a wary resignation. The survivors were whisked away under tight security, rushed through decontamination and questioning, their statements recorded and then sequestered by officials whose faces revealed nothing. Within days, the story that began in the heart of the ice would disappear into a labyrinth of secrecy and silence. The official account was brief and bloodless. A mechanical failure, compounded by a record-breaking storm, had forced the evacuation of the station. The incident was described as a tragedy, but not an unprecedented one, an unfortunate reminder of the dangers faced by polar researchers. No mention was made of the bacteria, the mutations, or the inexplicable events that had unfolded in the darkness beneath the ice. Even the most basic details were carefully controlled, filtered through layers of public relations experts and security agencies before being released to the world. Inside the corridors of power, however, the full story sparked a different response. The survivors were separated and subjected to endless interviews, first by doctors and scientists, then by specialists whose credentials were never disclosed. Blood samples were taken, personal effects confiscated, and every word scrutinized for signs of contamination or threat. Files were stamped with bold warnings, classified, eyes only. Access to the most sensitive data was tightly restricted, buried beneath encryption, locked away in windowless rooms far from prying eyes. Researchers and military officials debated in shadowy conference rooms, arguing over what could be salvaged and what must remain hidden. A handful of scientists, shaken by what they had witnessed, tried to push for transparency. They argued that the world needed to understand the risks, that future expeditions depended on learning from the mistakes of the past. But their voices were drowned out by a chorus of caution. It was too dangerous, the risk of panic too great. If the world knew what truly lay beneath the ice, life forms that defied biology, phenomena that blurred the line between reality and legend, energies that hinted at powers science could not explain, what order could be maintained? Leaked documents circulated on encrypted networks, filled with redactions and code names, but the truth was always out of reach. Anonymous sources hinted at research continuing in secret, new labs built in remote locations, teams assembled under cover of other projects. There were rumors of technology inspired by the ice samples, of medical treatments and weapon prototypes
quietly emerging from hidden research programs. Whistleblowers vanished into silence, their warnings lost in the noise of denials and official statements. To the outside world, life went on as usual. The ice would freeze over the ruins of the camp, erasing the last physical traces of what had occurred. News outlets moved on to other stories, and the world forgot. Only a few, haunted by memory and knowledge too heavy to share, carried the secret forward. A knowledge both gift and a curse, a promise and a warning. Some secrets, they learned, cannot be spoken aloud. They live on in the shadows, in classified reports and locked vaults, in the nightmares of those who returned, and in the ambitions of those who never left the ice behind. The cold preserves not only the mysteries of the past, but the silence that follows, a silence more profound than any storm. And so the true story of what was found in the ancient ice would remain hidden, sealed away by fear, pride, and the chilling certainty that the world was not ready to know. At first, there was only relief, an uneasy, brittle peace that came with returning to civilization and the illusion of control. The survivors were dispersed, their movements tracked, and their lives carefully managed, as if proximity to the ice had left them radioactive. Labs and containment centers tightened protocols. Files disappeared into locked archives, and a suffocating silence settled over every conversation about what had truly happened. For a while, it seemed as though the ancient organisms, the mutations, and the specters of madness would remain forever confined to memory and secret vaults. But the ice is not easily forgotten. In the months that followed, subtle signs began to surface, first in remote corners, then at the edges of the familiar world. It started with a technician at a polar research facility, half a continent away, reporting unusual symptoms, persistent chills, odd skin lesions that formed branching frost-like patterns, and fever dreams filled with visions of endless tunnels beneath blue-white stone. Blood tests revealed markers no one could explain, proteins and enzymes that defied categorization, sequences that echoed the encrypted files buried in classified government servers. The alarm spread quietly, initially dismissed as coincidence or stress-related illness, but as more cases emerged, patterns formed. A cargo handler at a northern port developed inexplicable tremors and a sensitivity to low temperatures, his cells showing traces of microbial structures only seen in the aftermath of the catastrophe. In another city, a young child who had never left the mainland began drawing intricate spiral patterns in the condensation on a window, shapes identical to those found etched in the ancient core samples. Environmental monitoring in regions thought to be untouched began to yield troubling results. Spores, DNA fragments, even traces of active colonies were detected in the snow, water, and air, all genetically linked to the organisms unearthed by the expedition. A sense of dread built behind closed doors as officials realized what had happened. Somewhere in the confusion of the evacuation, or perhaps in the chaos of the accident, containment had failed in ways no protocol had predicted. The ancient microbes, adaptable and relentless, had found pathways out, on clothing, in cargo, through the subtle currents of air that slip past even the most sophisticated barriers. Some had remained dormant, hidden in cracks and crevices,
while others had already begun to adapt to new environments, mutating in ways both unpredictable and alarming.
Emergency meetings followed, shrouded in secrecy and denial. Quiet quarantines appeared in remote towns. Scientists dispatched in plain clothes to collect samples and monitor for further signs. The media was kept at bay with carefully worded statements about routine investigations and harmless anomalies. But inside the labs, panic simmered. Attempts to eradicate the organisms met with mixed success. What worked in one region failed in another, as the microbes evolved with chilling speed. Desperate measures were proposed: burning contaminated ground, introducing engineered predators, even discussing options that veered dangerously close to science fiction. Within weeks, the scale of the threat became clear. The new life forms were no longer a laboratory curiosity. They were a moving target, reshaping their own biology to suit whatever environment they found. They slipped into water supplies, clung to imported goods, and traveled unseen in the wind. Communities hundreds of miles from the original disaster began to see spikes in unexplained illness, crops failing with symptoms no botanist could diagnose, and wildlife behaving erratically. The story, so carefully hidden, threatened to burst into the open, not with the force of revelation, but with the slow, inexorable spread of something older and more cunning than any human plan. For those who knew the truth, the world became a map of potential outbreaks, every contact a new risk, every unexplained symptom a shadow from the ice. The ancient organisms had escaped, not with the drama of disaster movies, but with the patience and subtlety of evolution itself. What was once a contained mystery had become a living, shifting question mark hanging over the future, a reminder that even the oldest secrets, once disturbed, can never truly be put back. The world braced itself for answers that might never come, and for the slow, cold approach of a threat as persistent and enigmatic as the ice from which it had been born. As the eerie patterns of sickness and unexplained phenomena multiplied across the globe, the illusion of containment crumbled in spectacular fashion. Reports of anomalous outbreaks trickled from the edges of civilization to its very heart, subtly at first, then in an unstoppable wave. The whispers of isolated contamination gave way to international concern, as environmental monitors, epidemiologists, and intelligence agencies pieced together a pattern too clear to deny. What had begun in the silence of the polar ice was now a crisis rippling across continents, forcing humanity to reckon with a threat that respected no borders and followed no known rules.
Governments moved quickly, some with transparency, others with secretive urgency. Emergency summits assembled in major capitals, with delegations arriving under the cloak of night, their faces tense and eyes haunted. Old alliances were rekindled, new partnerships forged out of necessity. The United Nations convened an emergency session, its chambers filled with the anxious murmurs of diplomats, scientists, and security experts struggling to find common ground. An international task force was established, drawing on expertise from virology, climatology, military logistics, and disaster management. Resources were pooled, data shared in encrypted files that flashed between satellites and underground servers. Across the world, research stations in polar regions and high mountain labs were closed or evacuated, their samples locked in deep quarantine or destroyed under military supervision. Entire regions were cordoned off, with travel restrictions enforced by soldiers in biohazard suits, checkpoints springing up where only wind and snow had once ruled. Special rapid response units, equal parts scientist and soldier, were deployed to the most critical hotspots. Their mission? Track the spread, contain outbreaks, and gather any information that might reveal how to combat the ancient threat. Behind the scenes, a feverish exchange of information and desperation took hold. Genomic data and field reports streamed in from every corner of the globe. New protocols were drafted daily, sometimes hourly, as teams tried to stay one step ahead of the mutations. Laboratories raced to develop diagnostics, treatments, and countermeasures. In some cities, community testing sites appeared overnight, accompanied by quiet warnings not to panic. In others, rumors and misinformation ran wild, fueling suspicion and civil unrest as the gap between official statements and local realities widened. Political leaders faced impossible choices. Some countries imposed strict quarantines, shutting down ports and airports, while others issued calming reassurances and pressed for global coordination. Even within alliances, trust frayed. Fears of sabotage or scientific espionage simmered beneath the surface. There were moments of heroism and sacrifice as teams of doctors, researchers, and aid workers entered containment zones, risking exposure in the hope of turning the tide. At the heart of the international response was a singular realization. The world was no longer facing a scientific puzzle, but a living adversary, one that adapted, learned, and exploited every weakness in human systems. The ancient organisms, born of a time before human memory, seemed almost to anticipate the defenses marshaled against them. Efforts to destroy the microbes in one location only led to new adaptations in another. Environmental sterilization yielded strange, stubborn survivors. Yet there was also resilience, a determination not to surrender to fear. Networks of collaboration blossomed, linking minds across language and ideology. Satellite imagery was used to monitor changes in ice and land, tracking the organism's migration. Medical experts shared treatment successes and failures in real time. Open-source forums exploding with insights. Governments, even adversaries, found common purpose in the struggle, their disagreements eclipsed by the scale of the threat. In living rooms and laboratories alike, people watched as the world mobilized against an enemy older than civilization itself. The outcome was uncertain, the cost already immense. But as night fell across a planet drawn together by crisis, there remained a fragile hope, a belief that knowledge, cooperation, and perseverance might yet turn the tide. In the unblinking cold of the ice, a new chapter of human history was being written, not just of what was found beneath the surface, but of how the world responded when the past returned to test the future. With the spread of the awakened microorganisms came a host of new diseases, some bafflingly benign, others devastating in their novelty. Physicians documented symptoms never seen before. Persistent rashes that shimmered with subtle patterns, fevers that receded only to return with renewed vigor, neurological changes that blurred the boundary between dream and waking life. In isolated communities, entire generations developed new tolerances or vulnerabilities, some showing signs of immunity, while others succumbed to illnesses that defied all known treatments.
The World Health Organization, caught between urgency and uncertainty, restructured its protocols and teams, recognizing that the new threats were not simply medical, but ecological and evolutionary. Ecosystems changed as well. Plants began to flower out of season, some developing unexpected resistance to pests, others wilting overnight as invisible competitors claimed the soil. Forests shifted in composition. Tundra and taiga zones saw the arrival of unfamiliar insects and molds. The ancient microbes, freed from their icy prison, reshaped their new homes in ways that scientists were only beginning to track. Some changes were subtle, measured in the quiet disappearance of a songbird, or the sudden spread of a moss that glowed faintly in the dark. Others were catastrophic. Mass die-offs of fish in remote rivers, the collapse of bee colonies in regions where new pollen-borne spores had taken hold. In urban centers, public health campaigns changed forever. Thermal scanners, wearable biosensors, and rapid genome tests became as common as weather forecasts. Schools taught new units on biosecurity, and citizens learned to spot the warning signs of outbreaks that seemed to move with the seasons. Myths and folk stories, once relegated to bedtime, returned with new urgency, a reminder that the line between past and present was thinner than anyone had imagined. The boundaries of the human world shifted, no longer held firm by certainty, but ever watchful for what might emerge next. Yet even as the world reeled from the consequences, the relentless curiosity that had first drawn humanity to the ice remained undiminished. In time, after the worst of the outbreaks subsided and new routines settled over the battered planet, expeditions resumed. Tentative at first, then more ambitious. Governments, private foundations, and bold universities established new protocols, multi-layered containment, rotating teams, remote-operated labs deep beneath the surface. The memory of disaster had bred caution, but not paralysis. Now, every core sample was treated as both a window to the past and a potential threat. Every experiment run and reviewed by teams spread across time zones, no longer trusting a single gatekeeper. The new explorers moved with a sense of awe and gravity, their steps marked not by hubris, but by humility. They knew the cost of discovery, how a single overlooked sample, a failed seal, or a moment's distraction could unleash waves of change that circled the world. Yet the drive to understand, to reach further, was undiminished. In the cold, researchers uncovered more than just pathogens. New compounds hinted at revolutionary medicines. Trapped within the oldest layers, they found genetic blueprints for resilience, proteins that shielded against extreme cold or high radiation, enzymes capable of breaking down pollutants left by humanity's own era. For every danger, there was a promise, each risk shadowed by the hope of renewal. And so, beneath the eternal auroras, the drilling resumed, now watched by the eyes of a planet made cautious but not cowed. Every new discovery brought a mixture of wonder and dread, a sense of standing at the threshold of something vast and unfinished. Some researchers devoted themselves to mapping the boundaries between safety and calamity, building new sciences from the ashes of crisis. Others, in quiet moments, looked out across the frozen wastelands and wondered what secrets still lay hidden, what stories the next layer would tell. In the end, the ice remained, vast, indifferent, and patient. Humanity, restless and forever drawn to the unknown, returned again and again, driven by the same questions that had led the first explorers into the white silence. What waits beneath? What lessons are frozen in the deep? With every expedition, the relationship between the world above and the world below grew more complex, a dance of hope and caution, ambition and memory. Even now, as civilization advances, the ice endures as a symbol and a warning. Its silence is deceptive, masking a depth of story and potential that no generation can exhaust. Each venture beneath the frozen crust is a dialogue with time, a wager that knowledge can overcome fear. But the cold, for all its beauty and stillness, remains eternal, a reminder that some mysteries, no matter how compelling, are never truly conquered. Perhaps this is why humanity returns, not in spite of the danger, but because of it, seeking in the endless white both redemption and revelation. Each new step onto the ice is both a defiance and a hope, a promise that the ancient, chilling wonders of the world have not yet told their final story. And so the cycle continues, driven by the insatiable need to know, in a world forever haunted and inspired by the secrets sleeping in the heart of the cold.